name is Corine Fairbanks, and tonight we're going to be talking about American Indian education. And we have as our special guest Doni-Jo Munro, who is the Executive Director of the American Indian Education Program. So Doni-Jo, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
I am a Creek and Yuchi Indian from Oklahoma. My tribe is, the Yuchis were originally from Georgia and did the long walk. There was 1,300 that started, 800 survived. When we reached Oklahoma, there was not many numbers, so they blended us with the Creek Nation, and we are, our language base is completely different. We speak a Siouan-based language, not a Muskogean-based language, but we follow the traditions of our mothers or our grandmothers. And I come from the Pickett sister clan. So if you go to Oklahoma and you see Pickett, Oklahoma, that's where my great-grandmother came from.
Okay. And so how did you get started working with American Indian education?
I started when my oldest son was in preschool. He's 23 now, so it's been about 20 years. I started as a volunteer. I had a friend that was a retired principal that had a big buffalo hide and a few things that he had made that he used to use with his children to teach. And when Thanksgiving time rolled around and they were going to start the whole Pilgrim Squanto thing, I asked if I could offer an alternative lesson because I felt it was offensive. And the teacher was very wonderful, and she let me go in and we did a whole presentation with the kids. And I prepared traditional food and the whole works. And then after that, we got invited to other schools to participate. In about 1994 or 5, I started working for the California Department of Education under the Indian Education Center's program grant, teaching a culture class once a month at the center downtown on Bunny Street in Santa Maria. And then in about 1994-95, I became the assistant to the director for the Title VII program, and which was a really small Indian program, about 127 kids, mostly based in the San Ynez, Santa Barbara area. And the next day, a few days later, I got the job. They said, "You're the director," gave me the box of files and a computer and said, "Here you go." So what I did was I went to families that I knew that were Indian and asked them to sign their kids up. I knew mostly Oklahoma people, a few Plains Indian people, and within a year, our program doubled. So since then, I go to the schools and try to find out the kids and just network through our community. It's usually word of mouth, that kind of thing. And then it's taken us about 15 years to get all the names from the different school districts. It's something that they very reluctantly do. But under the new FERPA law, they're required to give it to us now.
So how many districts would you say that you work with right now, school districts?
So we work with 28 different school districts. There's 147 schools because we deal with also the court and community schools, some homeschool programs, a lot of the teen programs where we have students that are either out sick or young parents, that kind of thing. But we're also, we cover every school in all the districts. So anyone, wherever there's an Indian child, we serve that school.
Okay. So, yeah, a lot of people know that we started our chapter because of a mascot issue in Carpinteria. And I know that there's been mascot issues up in the Santa Maria area as well, but what can you tell me some of the challenges that you have faced with, people, non-natives or white people wanting to honor us with mascots? Or, I mean, like, what has been your experience with that?
Well, when the mascot thing in Carpinteria started, Paul Cordero was my overseer when I first started with the program. And I also knew the family that was bringing up the mascot issue. I've known them since their kids were little. And I offered assistance to the county to kind of mediate with that because I felt, since knowing both people's personalities, that maybe I might be able to help with that, which was rejected. So, and I was told to stay out of it. It was not my business, which really was hard for me because I really cared about the Cordero family and I didn't want to be banned from it, but it'd be at the expense of my job in the program. So I did tell them that I would do whatever I could on the side, but I wasn't allowed to help or intervene. I felt that could have been handled completely differently. They just did not communicate, nor did they make any effort to really work together towards finding any kind of a solution. I myself have a lot of issues with the mascot images. I'm part Creek, so the Seminole Indians in Florida. Somebody said, well, they said it's okay. Well, they went to the tribe and asked them, how do you feel about this image? And they said, as long as you keep it in keeping with the way that our people look, and that you don't have some idiot riding around on a horse and acting stupid, that it has to be a Seminole person, blah, blah. They had, rules that they wanted before they allowed them to continue to use that, which they abided by. That was the Seminoles' choice. I feel like in Lompoc, they used the Braves image. They told the kids to dress up as Indians one day for a football game to show their pride. A boy that was Choctaw dressed in he had shorts on, but he wore a traditional type of outfit that they would wear when they play stickball. He was arrested for public nudity and indecency and had to register as a sex offender, which I felt was absolutely way ridiculous. You know, you have kids that wear a lot less clothing than that just on campus on a daily basis.
I know.
But to pick that one child out when he was actually representing who he really was as an Indian person, not just making or dressing up as an Indian, acting like a fool. Santa Maria High School, or excuse me, Raigeti High School, had Cowboy and Indian Day. I think it was about 2 years ago. And I called the principal and said that, you know, I got 100 texts from the kids. They were freaked out. They didn't like it. They were really upset it was happening. So I talked to the principal and I said, this is really something you need to address. Maybe you should not have it. If the Indian kids feel this way, you really need to respect their feelings. And he said, oh, I think you're being ridiculous. It's, you know, not a big deal. I said, well, I can offer you a cultural sensitivity training because it really is a big deal. If 100 kids have called me today because you're having this, it does matter. And he said, well, maybe next year, you can talk to the coordinator or whatever. So I called the yearbook myself and said that if you publish those pictures, you're going to have a lot of really upset people. What ended up happening is they had 2 little like thumbnail-sized pictures of that activity, but they didn't really publish it like they were going to. The kids felt a little vindicated with that because they felt like they were hurt a little bit, but no more conversation about it. They didn't want to hear any more about it and just get over yourself, and it's not that big of a deal. But it is. It's really racist. You wouldn't have people dressing in blackface for Martin Luther King Day. I mean, I think to myself, why are Indians the only ones that are allowed to be characterized in these demeaning matters? No other races.
I think that's a very valuable point, and I noticed that you brought a textbook, and prior to us, sitting down to do the show, we were talking about what was in the textbook. And again, I think people forget the larger scheme, which is kind of, if you have a mascot issue going on where it's obvious a reference to a past or a racial caricature of who Native people are, and then you've got a textbook that follows that up that basically still makes insinuations that we are all extinct.
Right.
Or tell me more about this textbook.
So in the beginning of the textbook, it says it talks about the first people as if we've come from someplace else to this land. I don't understand why schools and teachers don't understand that we have been here since the beginning of time. Archaeological evidence says we've been here for tens of thousands of years. It's okay to accept and believe that black people came from Africa, white people came from Europe, Asians came from Asia. Why can't Indians come from the North American continent? This is our turtle island. In the textbooks, they always show such primitive, negative, like Indians always have angry faces. They're always like either look like work animals. The way they talk about them as if it's past or it's extinct. I know when I was a child, when we learned this kind of stuff in school, they would say, a long time ago when the Indians lived, I would say, excuse me, I'm Indian, I'm still here. And they say, oh, you're not enough Indian to really matter. I'm like, well, gosh, that's all I know that I am in my being. And they would say my mother, oh, she's an exotic creature, she's very beautiful, but you really shouldn't talk about that. And I'm like, because you think freedom of religion was until what, 1978? I was already in high school. The pictures in here are just ridiculous. Even the kids that come to our center know that this is misinformation. They just think it's completely stupid. They'll say, well, I have to do this. No, you don't. And I think that the only way to change this type of information is, as Indian people, when their kids are learning this in school, to go in there and say, this is not the correct information. I don't want this taught to my child. We have an instance where they're going to be going to the local mission here pretty soon, the 4th graders. And I actively solicit for our Indian children not to have to go to that for that day, to be absent, to make a stand and say, you're going to lose your ADA that day for this child because I'm not letting my child be exposed to that. My children didn't go. I didn't allow it. I didn't allow them to build missions. I thought it was completely inappropriate. When they talked about manifest destiny, that affected my people a lot. So I wouldn't let my kids, when they did the president's report, I let my son tell the truth about Andrew Jackson.
Right. Question regarding the mission, has it been your experience working with some of these teachers, because it's been my experience, they seem relatively surprised when I try to make an analogy to a mission concentration camp, slavery, they don't seem to get it. And what's been your experience talking to white or non-native educators?
I had one teacher come up to me and say, wouldn't you be happier living on your reservation? And I was like, pardon me? And she says, well, wouldn't you be happier if you went back to your reservation? I said, well, I would love to have our homeland returned to us, but that would mean that all of you white people would have to go back to Europe and give us back our spaces. And she was angry and upset. She says, well, that can't happen. I said, well, why not? They have deportation. I think you should all go back to where you came from. Maybe let's do a do-over. And she thought it was a ridiculous statement. But my feeling was, you know, it's so ridiculous to think that Indian people want to live on reservations, or that was the worst land that they possibly had. And until they found, like in Oklahoma, they found oil, then they, you know, took it over. In California, every time I go somewhere, they assume that I'm Chumash. I guess there's no other tribe in the United States, according to them, when they're reading their history books, that if you're Indian, oh, you have to be Chumash. I would say, oh no, I'm Creek and Yuchi. They'll say, oh, well, you know, that doesn't really matter. Or what, you know, there's not very many of them left. I'm thinking, oh, I have a big family. There's quite a few of us. You know, there's 60,000 Creeks that live in California alone, not just tribally enrolled. But
see, a lot of people don't know their history, and they don't know that in the 1950s and early 60s, Los Angeles was one of the relocation centers where they sent Native people. We know that Oakland and San Francisco and Denver, I think, was one of them as well. So Los Angeles has a high concentration of urban Indian people.
yes.
And so, of course, it would make sense that some of them would want to relocate up to Santa Barbara. So we do have actually a pretty big Indian community here, don't we?
We do. We have, our program has 1,560 plus kids. I know that my grandmother and grandfather came out to Richmond to work in the shipyards during the war, and then she stayed here with her children, and he went back to Oklahoma. So a lot of people, a lot of the women stayed and worked as, you know, Rosie the Riveters, and worked in a lot of shipyards to feed their families and their children. But I just, I don't think people realize that in California alone, there's some 600,000 American Indian people. There's probably about 45 to 51,000 California tribes. But if you discount, you know, the other tribes that live here, you're discounting 550,000 people that live here. And it's ridiculous to think that, you know, we don't matter. And in the schools, they need to recognize, if the kids say, you know, I'm Creek, I'm Cherokee, they need to let them say, talk about their people and what's really real, not these ridiculous things that they have in their history books. I know that the kids just, it's a joke to them, especially kids that are Indian. They look at this and they say, look how stupid they look. You know, this is a ridiculous outfit.
Well, I think we need to make it clear that, okay, this is a joke to Native children that are in their community, living with the Native community. There's a lot of Native children that are not.
Yes.
So they would look at this and they would take it for granted that it's true and correct. And then they would also want to be honored by these idiotic mascots.
It's true, it's true.
So there is an interesting separation between Native families, Native children, in working with a Native community, and then you've got Native families that have a disconnect. They're not active and participating in their community. So that's another kind of point our question I had for you is, what other challenges have you had? Just being, I know that you serve a lot of families, you serve a lot of people, and I've also been, very happy that you almost your program almost does a lot of social service work, from what I understand. So what have been some of the challenges that you've dealt with kind of, you don't just do American Indian education, you also end up providing food for families. Can you tell me a little bit more of what your services are?
Yeah, the Title VII grant is to provide educational support for kids when they're in school, to make sure they perform at the same as white or other children.
But we know Native children learn in different ways than non-Native children.
And we also know from our statistics if you look up at the STAR data, that our kids are in the 80 and 90th percentiles when other children are below us, white children, or other children, let's say. Indian children actually do very well in school, despite the stuff that they have to deal with. Dealing with people that don't really know their tribal base or where they come from or who their people really are, I felt that part of my job is to give them access to information that they may not have. So if they come in and say, oh, I'm the descendant of a Cherokee princess, of course we all laugh because we know that that's ridiculous. But I say, oh, are you Cherokee really? Well, I have the Dawes rolls. Come in here and sit down and let's look up your family. Tell me who your people are. And they may find out that they're actually Choctaw. They're not Cherokee. And I make them go and look and find out. But we have an extensive library. We have books that are written by the tribes, by their own people that show images and positive things. I have kids say that, one kid was Catawba, he was insistent that his people were dressed like the Plains Indian, wore headdress, and said, honey, you wore turbans, you're farmers, that's not what it was. But not until he was a father himself did he say,